Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Aaron Salzberg. I'm the director of the Water Institute at the University of North Carolina, and along with my colleagues Hank Ovink and Kay Namba, we're members of the Scientific Planning Committee for World Water Week. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this third and final session on the politics and value of water. And I'll say personally, it's been quite a journey so far. For those of you who are not able to join us on Monday, our first session explored the complexities of decision-making around water, how differing views can influence the value of water, but at the same time, how these different valuations can make it difficult to reach consensus on how we manage water to meet everyone's needs and interests. Our second session yesterday, we started to explore solutions. How can we, given this complexity, make decisions that need to be made and address everyone's needs, particularly the most marginalized? What we heard was the need for more information and data, and for greater transparency and stakeholder participation in decision-making. Throughout the conversation, the roles and responsibilities of governments came up again and again, that we rely on governments to create the environment for public participation and transparency in decision-making, and to establish the legal, policy, and regulatory environment that protects rights and incentivizes the sound management of water resources. Equally important, we found that these responses need to be flexible and able to adapt to the changing social, economic, environmental, and hydrologic factors. Incredibly dynamic environment that we're all trying to manage and deal with. And this leads us to today's discussion, where we'll explore the steps governments can take to institutionalize practices that value water and advance sound decision-making. How can governments put adaptive and stakeholder-driven decision-making into practice? And to start us off, we're very fortunate to have recorded keynote remarks from the Honorable Minister of Water and Sanitation for South Africa, His Excellency Senzo Mchunu, and the founder and managing director of Waterways, Dr. Ornate Avedon. So without delay, let's start with the Honorable Minister. Your Excellency, how do we build resilient institutions that prioritize water through spaces that allow for adaptive and participatory decision-making? Okay, if we can play the video.
Moderator, Excellencies, distinguished panelists and participants, ladies and gentlemen. At the onset, I would like to appeal for an honest and reflective analysis on the situation of water today. Let us reflect honestly on the decisions that we take as leaders and view them against the looming water crisis that we face today. This crisis can be attributed to the politics of water, which is fast becoming a make or break situation impacting on the millions of our people still without access to water. We cannot detach ourselves from the situation. We are obliged as leaders to save this finite resource called water for generations to come. We need to answer the difficult questions. Have we done what we have pledged to do? As we look back at the steps we've taken to address global water challenges, have we put in place the decision-making processes that will ensure sustainable delivery of water and sanitation services for all? Moderator, if the current world pandemic, COVID-19, with the turbulence and shake-up that it brought upon nations, could not inspire change in our approach in dealing with the decisions we make on water, it will be interesting to know what else can bring change. COVID-19 ravaged economies, lives, and livelihoods globally without forewarning and left us with very little time to prepare our combat strategies. Water became the center for convergence and stood as the first line of defense against the virus. It remains evident that as we all washed our hands with water, we left the unserved to face the virus barehanded. This must be corrected. Let us use this crisis as an escalator for accelerated and enhanced water decision-making. It is evident that building resilient institutions through spaces for adaptive and participatory decision-making is almost the last opportunity left for leaders to live up to the promise made at the adoptive SDGs, in particular SDG 6 on water and sanitation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot continue in the same tragedy of turning a blind eye to those who call out for basic rights. As we agree that water is life, sanitation is dignity, if we as leaders mean what we pronounce and engage openly on behalf of the millions of our countries who are denied these rights, the right to life and dignity that they deserve, we can await history to judge us harshly. To those leaders who have not started providing this right to life, step in and join other leaders. To those leaders who are progressing and changing the lives of our people, step up. And to those leaders who are on course and striving to leave no one behind, we applaud you and would like to invite you to step forward and act on water and by all, with and by all. Despite the fact that water is ranked the third global risk of concern, most leaders do not take this early warning and strive to elevate water in the global agenda. Peter Drucker warned on the danger of not acting on time when he said, I quote, "The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic," close quotes, giving us much to reflect on when we consider the important and critical decisions on water that are not implemented. Valuing water can play a critical role in changing the way we manage water. Building and appreciating across stakeholders of the value of water and creating mechanisms that allow us to maximize the value and productivity of water. We will in future have no option, but the value of water will mainly be imposed by the increasing pressures on limited water resources. The worst that we are facing as the world is the looming crisis posed by climate change. The big question remains, are leaders and all in power ready to act or to react? I submit, Excellencies, that we choose to act and not react. We might be late. Moderator, allow me to cite South Africa, my country, where water law reforms were a direct result of historic elections of 1994. The 1998 Water Act sought to implement the two key principles of the 1997 National Water Policy, namely sustainability and equity. These principles found resonance in our Constitution, as the right to water is enshrined in the Constitution. What is left for us as leaders today is to honor the commitments we made and inspire hope as we move forward. Regional cooperation was enhanced when AU heads of state adopted the Continental Africa Water Investment Program in February this year, a program that seeks to pave the way for water security and job creation in Africa to accelerate investment, climate resilient water infrastructure, transboundary management in response to urgent obstacles that Africa faces in meeting its obligations. A sustained high-level political commitment to the water agenda in the region was highlighted in the call for a high-level panel on water investments for Africa, a call to action, which was also one of the key outcomes of the 2021 Africa Regional Bond Dialogue for results. I therefore believe that the outcome of this seminar will change the words of Charles Kettering when he said, "The world hates change, yet it is the only thing that has brought progress." Close quotes. We are therefore left with no option as leaders but to effect change and focus on enhancing the resilience and capabilities of our water institutions if we are to succeed in the limited time left to salvage the fast diminishing water resources in our country. I therefore would like to challenge my fellow leaders to enhance the change and raise their hands and commit to step in, step up, and step forward in our respective spaces as we leave this session. Moderator, I would like to conclude by saying we are running against time. We need to move with speed, otherwise we will have only ourselves to blame if we do not act against this looming crisis. As I step off, I want us to remember the words of Maud Barlow when he said, I quote, "There's simply no way to overstate the water crisis on the planet today," close quotes. Real long-lasting change comes through legal, policy, regulatory, and institutional reform. As government leaders, we must make the hard decisions and make the difficult path of institutionalizing change and making water a priority, not just today, but forever. In conclusion, I call on all policymakers, decision makers, and leaders to step forward.
Fantastic and truly inspirational remarks. Just to look back at some of what His Excellency said, reflect honestly, answer the difficult questions. If COVID can't change us, what can? The last opportunity left for leaders is to make changes in water. We cannot turn a blind eye, or history will judge us harshly. We cannot act using yesterday's knowledge. The examples of how South Africa itself has stepped up to make changes nationally, to institutionalize reform so that it could provide for its people, but the call not just to act unilaterally, but to act collectively as governments through the UN and through other entities. And finally, that there is no other option. We need to step up and step forward, and that we are running out of time, and that if we don't respond, we have only ourselves to blame. What a fantastic set of opening remarks, and thank you, Your Excellency. Really well done. And now I'd like to turn to Dr. Orneet Avidar. Dr. Avidar, from your perspective, how can we prioritize water development in international development policy? And Kay, can we run that video?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me. I will talk today about the vision I call Water First and the need to prioritize the water sector within the international development policy for developing countries. For the last 11 years, I've been dealing with the issues of water in developing countries. I received my PhD from Ben-Gurion University, Israel, on sustainable access to clean water in Siaya County, Kenya. And in the next few months, I will be joining the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis in Vienna as a postdoctoral fellow. My research motivation is the mind-boggling reality and question: how can it be that in this day and age, 785 million people around the world, mainly in developing countries, do not have access to clean water, and 1.6 billion are expected not to have safe water in 2030? And this is after decades of international water programs and billions of dollars of aid. I came to the conclusion that there are two main issues which are standing in the way of global access to clean water. Funny enough, although these are very obvious to us in this conference, they are not necessarily obvious to the overall international development community. And in practice, they do not get the recognition and priority they rightfully deserve. The first is the chronic lack of sustainable water projects across many developing countries. My dissertation researched this through a holistic integrated approach which I devised. The second is what I call the Water First vision, which I am currently researching. Although we all agree that water is life, and we all understand today that clean water is the basis for many other development goals, within international programming and strategic vision, water is still not a priority, and the funds for water are not sufficient. We also see that in many governmental and developing agencies, water is under-prioritized financially. This shows a significant discrepancy between nice programs to the on-the-ground needs and practices. Thus, I believe development programs should switch to the vision and mindset of water first, understanding that water is not more important than other SDGs, but rather their foundation. I advocate for a water-driven development strategy, suggesting that water for all can be attained by prioritizing water financially and through changing of mindsets. The research has four main objectives. The first, to reiterate the importance of water, obvious, but still not internalized. The second is to substantiate that clean water is somehow sidelined and under-prioritized in global policy and funding, and how this trickles down to national policies in developing countries. The third objective is to demonstrate the impact of clean water on other SDGs. There are a vast amount of examples in the literature verifying the impact of water on health, gender equity, education, food security, and more. And I'm compiling them into a comprehensive study. demonstrate prioritization of clean water and its effect through the case study of the State of Israel. Israel has not always been the technological savvy and economically prosperous country it is. But a great part of its positive growth over the years was the very simple acknowledgement of the importance of water by its founding leaders, understanding that without water, there will be no development, no progress, and no economic growth. In retrospect, water first was a guiding philosophy to the formation of the country, transforming a desert country from water scarcity to water surplus. For decades, the international community has tried to reduce poverty substantially and to promote all the human rights, but with limited success. I suggest that a water-driven development strategy be tried. The goal of the study is to instill the importance of clean water and its impact on other SDGs academically, advocating that it should be prioritized by the international community. Water for all worldwide can be achieved in our lifetime, and once that is achieved, other development goals will be positively impacted at a lower financial investment. If lessons are not learned, there won't be any change, and water for all is not likely to happen by 2030, as it didn't happen in the past. But several things need to be done. The first, the international community and local governments must change their mindset to a more positive one and acknowledge that water for all is achievable. The second, there must be a profound commitment to prioritize water first in funding and programs with the understanding that it is the basis for most other SDGs. The third, the acknowledgement of the importance of sustainability and construction of sustainable water projects which need to be planned holistically. I will be happy to answer any questions in the conference networking opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Avidar. And she, by the way, she is with us. So please do ask questions in the chat or in the Passable chat site. And I think we'll be happy to continue this conversation. But look, one of the things that I've often argued, if you want to know the policy of a country, look at their budget. And I think that's the heart of the matter that I think Dr. Avidar was getting at. That water, while we do a lot of talking about making water a priority, is that really being reflected in the budgetary processes that these governments have? And I really love the idea of how do we switch to a water first mindset and begin to prioritize water, not just through rhetoric and not just through policy, but through budgetary actions. And so I think that's a really wonderful set of ideas to start our conversation off with. So with those two introductions, I'm really excited to turn this over to our group of distinguished panelists to get their perspectives. For the sake of time, we won't be doing detailed introductions for all of our panelists, so I really encourage you to check out their full bios on our session site. Our discussion will be moderated by Alex Samalawe, the head of climate and executive secretary for Africa at the Global Water Partnership. But before turning to Alex, I want to remind everyone that we also want to hear from you. And sorry, let's see if I can actually do this. We've set up a poll question on our Passable site where you can provide your thoughts in 1 or 2 words on the following question. What are the actions that should be taken by government leaders to build resilient institutions? So please log on, tell us what you think. We'll bring this back up at the end of the show, and we really do want to hear what you guys are thinking and get your input. So Alex, now over to you. Alex, I think you're muted, or we can't hear you. We still can't hear you. I'll give you an additional second to see if you might be able to. get in. No? Okay, well, Alex is trying to find his way into the discussion, and maybe Alex, you might want to step out and try and re-enter and see if that helps. But maybe we can do it this way. Are all the panelists on the screen? Let me make sure I can see everybody. Perfect. Okay, good. We've got Vina, Kellyanne, Safa, perfect. Orny, good. Everybody else is around. Perfect. So maybe, Kellyanne, can you first maybe introduce yourself, tell us where you're coming from, and then I guess the question that we're hoping you might be able to reflect on is, in view of growing water pressure, what lessons and best practices are there to improve the implementation of water projects and accommodate the diverse interests in water management and institutions? And who is it that must ensure that these views and inputs really come out of the sessions like this?
Great, Aaron. Can you hear me?
I can.
You can. Okay, good. Great. Well, thank you so much for that great question. And just to introduce myself, my name is Kellyanne Naylor, and kind of in my day job, I serve as the Director for Water Sanitation and Hygiene at UNICEF, but I'm also currently serving as the Vice Chair of UN Water, which is the capacity that I'm here today. So Aaron, I really wanted to take this question kind of from a UN Water perspective, but also building on my experience in UNICEF working at country level. And really in thinking about how we can institutionalize reforms in government to make long-standing changes. This is something that we've been reflecting on a lot inside of UN Water, because we do represent such a diverse group of UN agencies and members and partners. And so I think we came up with 3 ingredients for success. I think they're not at all silver bullets. They're probably things we've said before, but we think that this is where the real hard work is needed. So the first one that I wanted to talk about, and again, is maybe not surprising coming from UN Water, but it's coordination. And I think what we have been learning and what I have been learning in this role is that while coordination isn't new, we're learning much more about the type of coordination that is needed. And I think first and foremost, the need to renew our commitment to coordination. I think as a sector, we tend to be good at coordinating pieces of the sector, emergency responses, the rural sector, the urban sector, but really we don't allow sufficient time and resources to be able to do this at a level that I think is needed in 2 dimensions. And the first one, I think, is the multi-stakeholder dimension. And we've seen the importance of having all of the key actors and different water users around the table in a participatory process, but it's also the intersectoral dimension. And I think, you know, as we look at the way that the water sector is brought about through the food sector, agriculture, energy, environmental protection, and WASH, we often see at country level, we end up kind of coordinating across the line ministries. So I think we're finding that there's this exciting space where we're going into food systems, where we're going into biodiversity, but bringing the whole of the water sector so that, you know, in my experience as being someone who comes from the WASH part of the sector, being exposed to how we're finding these types of solutions for the whole of water. And just one experience, you asked about best practices and experiences. We've been, as UN Water, doing a pilot country level engagement experience where we're trying to work with UN resident coordinators and the UN country teams to really provide more integrated policy advice to countries on water beyond these institutional, kind of traditional, specific approaches of WASH agriculture, water resources management, ecosystems, but providing that advice to the government in a more integrated way. So that's, I think, the first one. I'll try to be short because these are so passionate, but the second one is really around alignment. And I think that coordination is necessary, but it's insufficient. And I think a lot of times when I've been part of coordination, we're still coming to the table with our own projects, our own approaches, even sometimes in the same geographic areas. So I think this is, again, an area where government leadership is really necessary to make sure that we have an alignment of the operational, financial strategies, policies, and approaches that can really reduce this fragmentation and increase the overall efficiency and effectiveness. And I thought that Alex was going to be the moderator, so I was going to really appreciate the efforts by GWPSA with the Africa Water Investment Program, which through the engagement that I've been in with UNICEF, we see as a really promising example of how coordination and alignment are coming together to accelerate progress. And Erin, I know time is short, but I couldn't leave this chance without saying that the third ingredient is around how we can accelerate and sustain progress. And I think we're all aware, and I heard in your opening remarks, Erin, about the fact that we need to speed up. And, you know, I think when we talk about acceleration for kind of the math geeks here, we think about speed, time, distance, you know, the change in our rate. So we need to do that to reach everyone. And so that's why, as UN Water, we put together the SDG Global Acceleration Framework as a way of helping partners and governments come together around these 5 accelerator areas: financing, data and information, capacity development, innovation, and governance, to be able to coordinate, align, and engage with countries to accelerate progress. So I think it's certainly a complex picture, but I fully agree with what you said. We must tackle this now. We must move out of our comfort zones. We must work together as a whole of a sector if we're really going to reach our sustainable development objectives across the board. So thanks so much, and Erin, back over to you.
No, thank you, Kellyanne, for the very thoughtful response. And those calls to action came from the minister, not from me. So all credit goes to His Excellency from South Africa, because they were wonderful remarks. And yeah, I'm sure Alex, can you say a word? Maybe you can get back on, because you look a little different now, and you've got the little icon there. If you unmute yourself on the icon.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we can. Okay, so Alex is back. So I will then cede this back over to Alex and make Kellyanne happy, because I know she'd really appreciate that. You can appreciate me too, by the way, but that's okay. We'll turn it back to Alex. Alex, take it away from here.
Yeah, I haven't done anything, so I don't know what happened the first time. but thanks a lot, Aaron. I think you gave a great introduction to the session. And I think Kelly also has well articulated the experience from UNICEF, but also in her capacity as UN Water. So I think now we're going to go to the next panelist, the Executive Secretary of AMCO, the Acting Executive Secretary, Mr. Thomas Banda. So the core question still remains the same. How do you institutionalize policy reform? That's really the subject of the discussion. So that question still remains very, very core. But now we're going to hear from Mr. Thomas Banda. Mr. Thomas Banda, you work with many ministers across Africa. Do you think governments have what it takes to build resilient institutions through spaces for adaptive and participatory decision-making?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Yes, indeed. It's a bit of a challenging question, but I can say that I think the governments are ready to build, resilient, institutions. I think from the government's point of view, what I look at it is if we can put our hands together in creating an enabling environment, because all of this is hinging on that enabling environment. We can come up with so many ideas and whatever, but if the environment is not enabling, then it will just be the talk. So yes, I think we need to look at developing the evidence-based climate smart resilient watch policies and strategies. And from this, if we can take this up to the political leadership, that they can shape the policy direction, the political leadership, it will be quite beneficial. We need, I think, to look at the popularizing the human rights approach, where we leave no one behind whenever we are factoring in this decision making to build the resilient institutions. We need to consider equity, inclusion, and gender decision making at high levels. Currently at AMCO, we are developing a social inclusion strategy where we have recognized the fact that women, the youth, they are not properly incorporated at the right level of the decision making, and yet the decisions that are being made affect this kind of groups most than the others. For example, I think if you look at a girl child waking up early in the morning, I'm now talking from experience in an African setup. Early in the morning, go and draw water. The time that they spend is hours and hours of time, productive time that they could be put something into productive use. We need, I think, to reinforce also the local systems and coordination mechanisms for joint planning, implementation, monitoring, and reporting. Again, this is something that the government can actually enforce. And I think another most important thing that also comes into my mind as the demand for the building on resilience institutions could be acceleration of action on the SD accelerators. We have been talking about not just talk and talk, but to get action. I think my minister, South Africa, they have already talked about the need for us to get into action. So accelerating these SD6 accelerators like financing, data and information, capacity development, innovation, and good governance could be an ingredient in this. And I think still hinging on creating an enabling environment, I would say we need to shift from funding to financing. We need to enable the private sector to come in and support us, the governments and the different stakeholders through, for example, the public-private partnerships. So yeah, this could be my submission at this point in time, Alex. Thank you, over to you.
Alex, you're muted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so Thomas, I was just saying that I think you've mentioned as a big block, improving the enabling environment, human rights approach, which in many cases also reinforces Dr. Onech's proposition about water-first approach. As well, you've also mentioned the importance of shifting funding, basically attracting more private sector participation. So I'll come back to you, but I think let's hear also from one of our colleagues who is going to speak very much about the issue of Dr. Onech, Dr. Vina Srinivasana, who is a senior fellow at the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment from Bangalore. She's going to talk to us about and really respond to the specific question that, okay, let's assume the enabling environment is right. As Thomas Banda has indicated, that's what needs to be done. Dr. Vina, if decisions taken by governments are informed by stakeholder engagement, consultation with proper analysis, and application of policy implementation on water projects. Assuming all this were done, what contributes to rejection, delays, cost escalation, or total failure of projects? Because we heard from Dr. Onit, 30 to 60% of water projects are not sustainable. So assuming government decisions are taken on water projects through consultation, informed by data, what then leads to delays, cost escalation, and total failure of projects? Dr. Veena Srinivasan, over to you.
Thank you so much for that question, Alex. I'm of course going to speak from my experience in the Indian context. And I think there are a few, four perhaps major factors that are worth mentioning. And I think the first one is silos, because even though we do analysis as well as consultation, one of the problems remains silos between agencies, as well as silos within academia and the groups that are doing the analysis and research. And a common one, since we've been talking about water and sanitation, is the problem with ground and surface water, for example, being treated as completely separate. And one of the big problems in India, particularly in the rural drinking water sector, is groundwater depletion driven by agricultural pumping, by private pumping by farmers, leading to decline in water tables, resulting in slipbacks in drinking water projects, slippage in drinking water projects. And I think that the fact that they sit in very different sectors, drinking water sits with the Ministry of Municipal Administration or drinking water, and often the decisions of farmer pumping are driven by either food security or electricity policy. These are completely taken in different domains. It's very different, and because in spite of people understanding the importance of IWRM, it hasn't in fact been practiced and put into practice in the way that we would all like. And so I think this is the first gap that remains. The second gap, I think, is that one would all of us would like to see those projects which are really done in a truly participatory way with stakeholder consultation and multi-stakeholder engagement. But what we often find is that project design, especially large multi-purpose complex projects, are driven by and emerge as a result of competing political exigencies, and often the multi-stakeholder engagement isn't in the design phase, but really sort of a rubber stamping that can happen afterwards. And when this happens, often it's not a truly inclusive or participatory in the way it should have been, but it's really more of an afterthought. And so that kind of then results in continuous non-acceptance of the project. The third one is lack of sufficient data. And I think this is a sub-point to the lack of participation and inclusion. In India, for example, in several of the river basins, which are transboundary river basins, that's the Indus, the Ganga, the Brahmaputra, these cover, the majority of India. The data in these basins is considered classified. And so even though projects are planned and stakeholder consultations may be held, the data on which the project design was based are not in the public domain. And so it's very difficult to refute the claims and counterclaims that are made around the projects. And as a result of which you have this endless cycle of perpetual conflict because it can't be satisfied. People file lawsuits, there are delays and rejection of the project. And I think that this absence of data, but also this culture, putting data out in the public domain and allowing it to be truly, available, to be massaged and checked and counter-checked and debated by in a public manner, that doesn't actually exist. And so I think without data being available fully and completely in the public domain, it's really hard to have true inclusion. The last point I want to make is the absence of learning. And I think this is related to data, but really to monitoring and evaluation of projects once they've been complete. After all of those delays and rejections have happened, there's often very little motivation to actually go back and reflect in a very serious way about what happened, what caused the delays, and do that in a structured way. And monitoring and evaluation budgets often actually go unspent in many states because for various reasons. And I think both, in order to change this, what you would really need is and to create those kinds of adaptive institutions and resilient institutions we've been talking about, I think that's predicated on having the ability to have projects, have all of the data out, have monitoring and evaluation done, preferably by third parties, and then have spaces as well as capacity to allow that reflection to happen. And I think unless all of these things happen, you're not going to kind of see, despite best intentions, you might continue to see these cycles of rejection, cost escalations, delays, and then project failure. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much. I think very succinct and well put together in terms of some of the challenges. I think post-project evaluation of why things fail also is often not done in the water sector. So colleagues, I mean, we've heard these different issues and some of the challenges. We want to hear from the presidency's office, from the President of South Africa's office. We are going to hear from Mr. Masopa, who is the head of water in the office of the Presidency for Investments in South Africa, who is representing Dr. Ramakopa. Mr. Masopa, what are the constraints that hinder the emergence and sustenance of resilience institutions that should promote participatory decision-making and adaptive water management? What are the constraints that hinder the emergence and sustenance of resilience institutions on water that promote participatory decision-making and management? And how can these constraints be addressed? Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, Alex, and thank you for the opportunity to address yourselves and everybody else on this webinar. I think it may be useful to just understand some contextual issues around water in South Africa and the scale of the challenge that we face at the moment. So we are a water scarce country. We are projected to have a water deficit of 17% by 2030. This obviously just does not just impact on human lives and sustainability, but also on the ability for the economy to grow, to create opportunities to lift people out of poverty, and to address challenges of inequality. We're also faced with challenges around the performance of existing infrastructure. So our water sector is split into 3 levels primarily. So we have sort of large-scale raw water infrastructure in terms of dams, pipelines, etc. We have bulk infrastructure that supports multiple municipalities, and we have distribution infrastructure at the municipal level. So though challenges may exist at the raw water and bulk level, the majority of our challenges exist at a distribution level and are underpinned by the financial performance at one level of such municipalities and their ability to provide sustainable services and the upkeep of infrastructure. So at the moment, we have somewhere in the region of about 56% of our wastewater treatment works in poor or critical condition, as well as about 44% of our water treatment works in the same poor or critical condition. So our challenge is not just around the development of new infrastructure and obviously the institutions that support it, but also around the maintenance of existing infrastructure. We have a strong and robust legislative and regulatory framework around water, but our challenges are sort of underpinned by 2 critical elements. The one is the availability and adaptability of skill in order to be able to manage water systems end to end. And this is particularly pronounced in rural and smaller municipalities. So in our large metropolitan cities, there's a concentration of skill and the availability of such resources, but this is a challenge in poorer and smaller municipalities. And then the second one, which is one that I want to spend a bit of time on, talking about the viability and strength of institutions that we build, is around the enforcement, the consistent enforcement of our regulatory framework. So this also touches on issues of political economy and the ability of different parts of government to take strong action against underperformance and the violation of regulations by other parts of government. So in our scenario, you'll have a national government responsible for regulation and enforcement and a local government level that is responsible for implementation. And the sort of need to take a break away from issues of intergovernmental relations in terms of our approach, and in some cases, being willing to use a stick approach in terms of dealing with challenges where it's not due to capacity constraints, but due to prioritization of other issues at the expense of water infrastructure, whether it's from the operation and maintenance of such infrastructure, or from the development of new infrastructure, which is able to accommodate and cater for underserviced populations. So really, when we speak about building resilient and adaptable and sustainable institutions, yes, the regulatory framework is important, but the element that we often miss is the degree to which different institutions of government are willing to enforce non-compliances against other arms of government, potentially within a complex political economy. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Alex.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Masopa. You've really mentioned a number of issues. I also mentioned this dire situation that South Africa is in terms of wastewater treatment plants, 56% not working, 44% of water treatment plants not working. Operational and maintenance, one of the key issues that is often forgotten across many countries. Let's also hear from the Mekong River Basin Commission. The issue of coordination keeps coming up. How do you coordinate across sectors? So you're going to hear a pre-recorded video from Dr. Analuk Kitikum, the Chief Strategy Officer from the Mekong River Commission. If you can play that video, please. Thank you. We can't hear the sound.
Water is.
Yes, Kay, you can proceed.
So when I think about water institutions, there are four key factors. Water institutions. On the one hand, the legal and institutional development of these water institutions or RBOs, and the other is the technical and strategic influence of them. So everybody wants to be in the upper right-hand corner, which is that you have high level of legal and institutional development and high level of technical and strategic influence. And on the other hand, if you have low level of legal and institutional development and low level of technical and strategic influence, then your capacity and the outcome in implementing your mandate are quite limited. So let's look at why certain RBOs are quite effective and resilient. First of all, we have to look at the legal mandate. Is the mandate given to RBOs among member countries, among riparian countries? Are they enough? Is there an international treaty among them? Is it sufficiently inclusive? Does it have a broad remit of what it can do in terms of addressing the basin-wide issues? The second is that stemming from that legal mandate is the institutional setup that had been established. does it include all the key players? Does it have mechanism to reach out to stakeholders, non-governmental actors, and other such influential agencies in that basin? And then looking at the strategic sort of level, because international rivers, they have a few countries, and in many other rivers, many countries, and they each have their own national plans and projects. So from a basin point of view, does it exist a common vision in terms of strategic plan, basin plan that try to optimize national projects, minimize transboundary costs? Or is this just about trying to blame each other on each other's national projects and plan, etc.? And then finally, you need a certain degree of objective or impartial science based on monitoring, based on studies, based on some facts. You don't need perfect information. You don't need a perfect study. And some studies about the future necessarily would have assumptions and gaps in data, but you need a certain level in order to aid the discussion and negotiation among the basin countries. Otherwise, then you are talking from perceptions and feelings, which is not always effective. So once you have these four key elements, we think that water institutions, in this case RBOs, are quite functional and effective in addressing flood, drought, impacts of water infrastructures, climate change, etc. To find out more, hello, myself and Kitikun, I'm the Chief Strategy.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we've heard in terms of some of the key elements based on a very, what's considered a very successful river basin, the Mekong River Basin Commission. So we're going to be winding up very soon this session. I think we've had many perspectives. But before we wind up and before I bring our speaker who is going to help us to bring everything together, the closing statement, I want to bring in again Dr. Onet. Dr. Onet, she started by laying a clear vision, a water-first development strategy, water-driven development strategy. And based on what you have heard from the presidency of South Africa, from India, from UNICEF, from AMCO, what is the missing link in the value chain of water? From political decisions, consultations, engagement with stakeholders, civil society, funding, implementation, and I can add monitoring and evaluation, and access by all water users. What is the missing link? And also considering what you said at the earlier on, water-driven development strategy on it.
Thank you, Alex. Well, as everyone has shown us, there is no one missing link, although we'd like to think so. There are several links and many missing factors, and they're all local dependent, and we have to always take that into consideration. But if we look on the global level, then like I said in my presentation, we really need to have a water-based mindset, understanding that without investing in water first, many of the other SDGs will not happen. So our development programs will not achieve what we're looking for. And like Aaron said, you see it in the budgets. I've seen development budgets where you have 25% in health and only 5% for water. And you understand that there's a big problem here because most of the water, most of the health issues are based on waterborne diseases, and that's a very simple equation here. But another issue is involving more and more local participation and decision making in all the stages, not only in the local minor or micro project, but also in the larger decision making and planning beforehand. And that's a very important issue. And the last but not least is there's a very distinct lack of supervision in all stages. And here too, I think local supervision has to be brought out and taken into consideration more thoroughly than it has been today. And that's and this has to be done in all the stages of planning, funding, and implementation. Supervision is a very, very important factor that is not taken seriously enough. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. I'll summarize. So there's no missing link as such. It's basically doing better what needs to be done or what's already being done. So with that, colleagues, I'm going to invite the International Special Envoy for Water from the Netherlands, Henk Onvik, who is going to give us a high-level summary of this session and also link to what happened in the previous session as was already introduced by Dr. Aaron, and also bridge us to the next session, because there is going to be another session that is going to close this seminar. Henk, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alex. With 3 minutes on the clock, this is of course an impossible mission, but this is the last session in the seminar on water and politics. There will not be another session, Alex. I'm very sorry. Although there are many sessions in World Water Week at Stockholm, not so much addressing this issue of water politics, but addressing the issue of water as a whole. First, the first session was really about stepping in. How can the politics of water and the choices we can make inform better decision making? That was addressed in session 2. Session 1 was really about action and activating action, really focusing on inclusion, bringing forward every voice in the room, and beyond any institutional capacity you could say. Second was about the decision making. How does this actionable approach lead to decision making that are indeed inclusive, comprehensive, and sustainable, looking at that long term? And in this last session, we try to bring it to the political agenda. And from my perspective, what you see is that there is this cry of pain from around the world, from the very bottom up, the community driven, where climate and water are impacting our lives and livelihoods for already so many years, and we see this massive gap. COVID-19 was a campaign for WASH, it didn't work. So the disconnect Ornit showed between health and water is across all SDGs. But this cry of pain also comes from the highest level, from the political level, as we heard His Excellency talk. But there's a mismatch between how we, as a water world and water professionals, find a connection between all this myriad of interlinkages and the innovations we try to bring forward. And that assessment also comes from the climate space, where the IPCC says, not in their AR6, but in their early report, that over 99% of our investments are actually increasing climate change and unsustainable future. And how we make those investments is actually making us more vulnerable. So the first session, stepping into this politics of water. The second session, by stepping up and making decisions better. And this third session, by stepping forward and making sure that we drive the politics of water forward, has to be accommodated indeed by a fourth session that is not happening, by stepping down. We have to step down in all those places and reach out to a broader and global community beyond the water sector to ensure that that complexity of water is not driving the worst of our society, but actually the best. That water is not bringing us apart, but actually bringing us together. I think that's a big responsibility the water world cannot take, definitely not on its own. So we have to bring our work of water workers into all these other sectors to ensure that we start to make these connections. That again can only happen when we are on the ground working with those communities in those places at risk. It's the final seconds of this session. I want to thank from all sessions, session 1, 2, and 3, and the full seminar, the organizations, but I want to especially highlight Kay, our young scientific programming committee leader, Kay Namba. She has a great future ahead of her. She made it all work. I want to thank you all. Here is Kay. Thank you, Kay. as well as with all the members of the seminar, all the members of our sessions, the speakers, and of course, all the excellencies in the room. And I'm pretty sure that with stepping in, stepping up, stepping forward, and stepping down, we will reach a water secure world with this commitment we've seen throughout these sessions. Thanks very much for your commitment. Government of South Africa, WMO, the World Resource Institute, Aaron, of course, and the institute you work for. Thanks very much. We really look forward to see you again in stepping down and taking action as of now in a different way.
Thank you. The session is over. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.